time for the Severe MMA preview show with Sean Sheehan, Spencer Kite, Harry Powell, and your host, Ian O'Neill.
That's right. It's UFC Vegas numero 68. And we're back again to preview the card that will be headlined by Derek Lewis and Sergey Spivac in the main event. Look at, we'll get straight to it about the card itself, right? I'm not that excited about it, I have to say. There's a couple of things. It's an all right card. I think what this card has going for it, lads, is that it's on in early February and not in maybe late November or October when we're already have been ground through the juggernaut of UFC events. So I actually am excited to get on and talk to you guys today. As always, I'm joined by Harry Powell, Mr. Brown Sauce himself, and Spencer Kite, all the way from Abbotsford. And how are we doing today, gentlemen? I hope you're well.
I love that nickname is going to take root.
I love it.
Unless you're talking about that fantastic fucking shirt, I don't need to hear a word out of your mouth. Talk us through that. That is a wonderful piece of kit.
Shout out to the boys at One Bone. This is the 4-year anniversary. It is the Michael. It is wrinkle free. It is just stunning, man. They do great work. The guys in Montreal have started sponsoring some UFC fighters. OSP was sponsored by them before his fight that got pulled. There might be a big name coming down the pipe, so we'll keep an eye out for that. They previously did some work with me over at Keyboard Kimura. Might be bringing some work over here to Severe MMA. So shouts to the fine folks at One Bone. We love you. We appreciate you. And the gear is just lovely. It's all I wear now.
Magical. I love it. It is a fantastic t-shirt. What's not that fantastic is this card, to be honest, in my opinion. But first of all, what is fantastic about this card, Spencer, is your good friend and your colleague Laura Sanko is getting her chance to kind of work by play. And I think it's fantastic. I love seeing it. I think she deserves that chance. She's been fantastic on the Contender Series. And kudos to the UFC. I know this is not going to be the first time or the last time that she's going to do it as well. I'm just really excited to see her thrown into the fold here. And it's going to be a wonderful mix into this fight night card in Vegas. Share your thoughts. This is a big deal for Laura. This is a big deal for the UFC. And it's a monumental occasion, if you ask me.
Yeah, it's a big deal all around, and it makes a lot of sense, right? She and John Gooden called the Road to UFC series, both the quarterfinals when they were in Singapore, semifinals when they were in Abu Dhabi ahead of UFC 280. And so it makes sense to bring her in here as someone who is familiar with these 8 athletes that are in the four finales on Saturday. But it's also just like in terms of her having put in the work, 2 seasons of Contender Series, the Road to UFC events, as I said, different work earlier than that with Invicta and calling some different regional promotions. She's done some work with LFA. She's put in the work. She's done the work. And the biggest thing to me, and this was my piece today on OSDB Sports, is that this card, while it isn't, as you said, a card full of big names, it's a card that really speaks to the importance of representation. I mean, Laura being part of the broadcast certainly speaks to that, right? First female in the modern UFC era to call an event. Only the second female ever, along with Kathy Long, who I know Laura has built a relationship with as she's been going down this path, reached out to Kathy and sort of forged a friendship there. She called UFC 1. And then you've got some athletes from nations that are just not represented in the UFC or have been minimally represented in the UFC over the course of these 30 years that it's been in existence. And so this is, we talk about it all the time, and I think it sort of falls on deaf ears a little bit, maybe with North American audiences and primarily with American audiences. And I don't say this to slag America or anything like that, but it's different when 45% of the roster is American. You guys have seen it with British fighters, with Irish fighters, with fighters from the UK in general. We see it with different European talents. We see it with fighters from all kinds of different nations, right? You see yourself and you see people from where you're from getting an opportunity. It resonates with you in a different way than just watching 2 athletes that you enjoy. And so to have Laura on this broadcast as well, where for the first time in nearly 30 years, some female that has broadcasting aspirations can flip through the channels and put on or go to ESPN Plus and hear a female voice, and not just, again, this isn't like diminishing the sideline reporter role, the work that Megan O'Leary, Heidi Androl, any of those people, or the desk role that Karen Bryant and Megan and various other people do, but hear somebody breaking down the X's and O's, and hear somebody running parallel with whoever her partners are going to be on Saturday, having those same insights and being as sharp and understanding of what's happening inside the octagon is massive. Like, there's no way for the three of us as white dudes that have always been represented to understand things, right? It doesn't resonate to me the same way, because I've always seen myself. I've always heard myself. But this weekend, a bunch of people that haven't and previously wouldn't have had that opportunity are going to get to. And that's a huge, huge thing that I think we really should be talking about more going into Saturday.
Absolutely. Very well said, Spencer. You know, we will talk about the road to the UFC fighters a little bit later on in the preview show. Obviously, Laura Sanko herself has forged her own road into the position where she will be on Saturday night, and that's fantastic to see as well. What else is fantastic to see, Harry, and I'm going to send it over to you, is a kind of a different looking Derek Lewis coming into this main event, a guy who has seemingly dropped a lot of weight given by all the pictures. So I know me and Spencer had a little bit of a conversation about it before we kicked off here, before you joined up with us. And for me, you know, it definitely proves to me that Derek Lewis isn't showing up on this Saturday or Sunday morning, whenever you're watching this. This card is at an unusual time. Obviously, it's supposed to happen in South Korea. Things didn't work out that way. It's in the Apex. It's on a kind of local South Korean time. So definitely check out your local listings for that. I know it's on at a ridiculously late time for me. I think it starts at midnight and the main card is at 3 a.m. So I'm going to get a little bit slice of your world maybe this Saturday, Harry. But back to Derek Lewis, I think, you know, he's not just showing up here on Saturday night for a paycheck. When you see pictures of Derek Lewis after losing a lot of weight, appearing in quote unquote much better shape to the eye anyway, at very least, what does that tell you?
Well, look, Derek has been a man that has been plagued by injuries for a long, long time. MMA, as we know, is a sport that is really hard on the body, and sparring and strength and conditioning and all of these sorts of things are things that take their toll and that need their recovery and whatever. Certainly, one of the things that doesn't aid that recovery is when you're carrying more weight than you need, whether that be muscle mass or otherwise, right? And I think for Derek Lewis, there may just be a realization here. And I think it's kind of a reverse arc for Derek Lewis, who came in with this monstrous power and this crazy celebration and just knocked a couple of dudes dead, right? And I think whilst we saw with Justin Gaethje and Trevor Whitman, he was like, you know, you could actually be really, really good at this if you just tried, you know? It felt to me, and I think Shawnee on the Big podcast at the time, I can't remember specifically what the fight was, but Derek came out and tried to actually fight. Instead of just waiting for a big right hand and a guy to shoot on him and he throws that monstrous uppercut, he actually tried to fight a bit. And it looked like he was going backwards. And I think it was going backwards because for the first time in his career, he'd actually learned how to fight a bit. And so I think if you're Derek Lewis, maybe now, as there's a new wrinkle, there's a bit of spice in the heavyweight division, it's given Derek Lewis, and I'm not saying that's purely the reason for this momentum shift, but I wonder whether there's some things in his personal life, some intangibles, as Sean hates for me to say, that have allowed Derek Lewis to start to take this sport a little bit more seriously, to allow to take himself more seriously. And yes, he's a man that likes to go in there and cash checks, but why not cash a bit bigger of a check as we're fighting up that echelon and we're renegotiating these contracts and we're putting ourselves in the best physical position for us to earn that money?
100%. And Spencer, you were kind of saying the same to me. You know, why now? What took you so long? Well, you know, one win in his last 4 fights, obviously 3 of those coming by way of knockout as well. Sparks some kind of a change that needed to happen in Derek Lewis's camp. And I'm glad for one to see that he has made that jump. And, you know, if he was out there saying the same things as he has this week, and Harry kind of alluded to, you know, giving it one last go, taking things a little bit more seriously, you know, it's important for him to do that. Like, if I had have heard him saying that, and it's just the same old Derek Lewis and the Black Beast coming in with looking all big and heavy with his belly and shit, I probably wouldn't be excited or really believe what he's saying. But, you know, we can see it with our eyes that there has been changes made. And you know, whilst I think Derek Lewis is probably always going to be a kind of a gatekeeper of sorts within the heavyweight division, I do not think that his time at gatekeeper is up, in my opinion. What are your thoughts on what you've seen and heard from Derek Lewis this week?
Yeah, I mean, I went a long stretch where I talked to Derek before most of his fights, and I didn't get a chance to before this one. And the first thing I would have said is just been like, okay, what the hell happened? What changed? Because you never wanted to be this guy. You never wanted to get here. And now here you are. You look great. And we're going to get to see on Saturday what that translates to. And to me, I think it makes this fight far more fascinating and far more captivating, because I've always thought Derek Lewis and always known Derek Lewis as a terrific athlete. You can't be the size he was and move around and do the things that he did. And now he's not carrying around that same mass. So what does that mean in terms of what he's able to do and how well he's able to do it? I think he's always going to be sort of the court jester of the UFC. He's always going to be the clown prince of the UFC. I saw a clip from the UFC digital team this week where he's talking about, you know, when I first got here, I loved it and I loved the crowd and I loved performing and all of these things. And now here I am all these years later and I hate this shit, and gets the big roar of a laugh. And as he does, but you can't look at that transformation, and it is a transformation, and think this is a guy that isn't invested. This is a guy that doesn't care. I would love to know if it was just a personal decision to, you know what, I'm going to make a concerted effort to try to figure these things out. We said, as we were sort of touching on what we were going to talk about here, I wondered if he's, you know, a little bit embarrassed, just the way things have gone, right? 1-3 in his last 4, stopped pretty quickly in his last 2. Is there a little bit of like, okay, I got to show some people, and this contributed to, and let me get in shape and let me give myself one last chance, as Harry was saying, to make a real run here and really assert who I am and where I am still in this division. And it really does. It makes this fight even more fascinating than it was.
Absolutely. And I'll stick with you, Spencer, just for a moment, just to talk about his opponent, Sergey Spivac, a guy we've talking about time and time again on the preview show. Obviously at 28 years of age, relatively young in his heavyweight career, per se. You know, heavyweights tend to go later into their primes. And, you know, we could be talking about a guy who still has a good 10 years left here. And to be honest, you know, if he gets it done, that's brilliant. He's up there. But if he doesn't, it's not all that worrisome for him. He has got plenty of time to get back on the bike and work on certain things. What kind of situation do you feel? He's obviously going to grasp this moment. It's a huge fight. It's probably the biggest fight that he's had to date. And it's definitely the toughest opponent that he's had to date too, given this new rejuvenated Derek Lewis that has come into fight week this week.
I'll give Tom Aspinall the nod as toughest
Tom Aspinall,
opponent.
apologies.
Because Tom's got a little bit more well-rounded game than Derek necessarily brings to the table. But I mean, Spivac is a guy, and we got into sort of the conversation about him back in August. Shawnee was on the preview show, said he didn't care about Augusto Sakai and Sergey Spivac. And my logic at the time was, this is a 27-year-old kid. It's a couple years into training at Extreme Couture, where he's getting really good reps and really good coaching. He's done well overall in his last handful of fights. At that point, it was 4-1 over his last 5. He's now 5-1 over his last 6. And sure, if you want to look at Carlos Felipe and say that's a guy that got bounced from the UFC for a couple of drug suspensions, fine. Jared Vandera, fine. But like, beating Alexei Oleinik is a solid win. Greg Hardy, whatever. He got him out of there real quick, knew exactly what to do, played to his strengths, and he feels like a guy to me that, as I've watched him develop, is figuring out who he is and how to play to those strengths and how to implement the things that he's good at. And in the heavyweight division, I'm always interested in that. I'm always fascinated to see these talents put the pieces together. We talk all the time about fighters not being in their prime until they're in their late 20s, early 30s, where that talent and experience kind of starts to overlap. He's hitting that point now. And so let's see if this is a guy that can maybe replace Derek Lewis as the gatekeeper or potentially climb even higher. Like, this fight to me has a real impact on how things line up in the division, as Harry said, where there's some spice now. There's some intrigue again. We've got a new title fight happening. We've got some contenders that are waiting to see who they're going to face. And this guy might be able to climb into that pack.
He certainly might, Harry. And, you know, he has a very good chance here against Derek Lewis. When you see these two guys going against one another on Saturday night, what are you kind of expecting to see, or how do you see the fight playing out between the two gentlemen?
So my thoughts pre-fight week were that we know that Derek Lewis has become a meme of just stand up, right? But there's only so many just stands ups you can do when you're carrying all that extra weight. And as Spencer said, you can be the most explosive athlete in the world, but those muscles are going to fill with lactic acid. Those fast twitch muscle fibers take a lot of energy and a lot of glycogen. And so now I see Derek Lewis looking the way he's looking. I do feel differently about how the way that this fight goes. I don't know whether Derek has been able to plug some of those technical gaps, because Sergey Spivac is a man that clearly knows how to grapple in this division. And I do think that grappling in the heavyweight division is certainly an equalizer, because generally you don't find guys that are super well-rounded in the heavyweight division in the same way that you find them at the lighter weight classes. And so I think if I'm Sergey Spivac, the answer is still to test that cardio. The answer is still to push the pace. The answer is still to get inside, make it dirty, but to shoot only when we're against the fence, right? We don't want to be working in open space where we can run into that cannon bowling ball bazooka right hand, but we want to do it when Derek is pushed up, feeling a little claustrophobic, and maybe getting a little bit frustrated with these clinch exchanges and not being able to find a way out. And I think for Sergey, like, he's somebody that just quietly has been building over the years. We look at the guys that he's lost to. Okay, Walt Harris, all the way back in the day, these things happen, right? 3-4 years ago now. You lose to Mycene Tarbora, fine. Sometimes these things happen. You go and you get a win over Tai Tuivasa, grand. You lose to Tom Aspinall, that dude could be champion one day, no problem. And you go away, and as Spencer already mentioned, the wins is one thing. But I feel like, again, and I'm not just reiterating Spencer's point here, but when we see technical advancements and technical progression at heavyweight in a way that Sergey Spivac has started to put these things together, that's always impressive to me. Do I think he's going to win a title? No, I don't think he's going to win a title. Do I think that we could see him in the upper echelon of this division? Yeah, with the right opponents and with the right results. Yeah, I absolutely do think that. Do I think that he can go in there, find Derek Lewis's hips, tire him out? This is 5 rounds. And can he drag Derek Lewis into the deep waters and test that cardio and win a unanimous decision? Yeah, I think he can do that. Because we know, and we can only talk about, and this is one of the reasons why our interest is peaked so high about Derek Lewis, is because he's come in and he's shown us something different. Do we know that Derek Lewis has the technical proficiency to stop those takedowns enough that force Sergey Spivac into a striking exchange? No, we don't know that. So if I'm Sergey Spivac, I'm like, I'm going to test that motherfucker's ground game early and often. And in the same way he did to Augusto Sakai, I'm going to wear on him. I'm going to wear him like a wet blanket, and I'm going to make sure I drown this guy. So that when we get to round 2, there's fuck all left in that dude's arms. There's nothing left in that dude's legs. And then I'm just going to finish him like. That Augusto Sakai performance was the one that really said to me, Sergey Spivac is changing. And look, Augusto Sakai isn't the best heavyweight in the world, but he is your Neil Magny-esque type in that division, where if you go and you smoke Augusto Sakai, we can start talking about some things that you could be doing in this division. And he went out and he just ran through him and made it look wonderful. And so let me see, boys. Let me see.
It sounds to me that you're fancying Spivac. Would I be right in saying that? If you're to pick who is going to be the winner of this fight?
as I say, I've not seen from a technical perspective that Derek Lewis has shown me anything new yet. All I've seen is a svelte physique. I could change my mind after second one, but as of right now, we must go with what we know. And that's that Sergey Spivac's grappling should be the equalizer, unless that svelte physique is going to show an ability to get them underhooks a lot quicker.
Absolutely. Very well said. Spencer, I'm going to move to you for the co-main event. That Young takes on Devin Clark in the co-main event. Not one that really sparks the imagination or lights the fire under you, really, to be honest. But I like that on Young because he moves forward. He likes to land big shots. And, you know, he came in there against just Dustin Jacoby in his last fight. He fucked around a little bit and he found out. But Dustin Jacoby knocks guys out for a living and had for a long time before he started MMA as well. So, I mean, we shouldn't throw the book out on Jung just yet.
Yeah, that's sort of the way I feel about it as well, right? Like, played stupid games, got stupid results. This is what happens. You go in there and your hands are down and you want to get into a fist fight with a guy that's better at fist fighting than you. You get put to sleep on Long Island. It happens. It happens a lot on Long Island, for that matter. And so, I mean, you look at a guy outside of that fight who's 4-0-1 in the UFC. He's 29 years old. It hasn't been great competition. I'll give you that. You get a draw with Sam Alvey. Like, that's not great. But I'm a Kennedy Nzechukwu fan, and he went out and smashed Kennedy. And so is this a kid that just, you know, got a little bit ahead of himself, got a little bit high on his own supply, and went out there and made a bunch of mistakes against Dustin Jacoby? We're going to find out, because Devin Clark, as limited as he is, and being kind of a 500 fighter in the UFC, is a big old fella. And his old man's going to be in the corner screaming so loud that it distracts you. And he's kind of a tough guy to get out of there. And you don't necessarily look good against Devin Clark, win or lose. And so we're going to find out what lessons Daun Jung took from that fight. And that's the reason I'm always going to be interested, right? Let me see more data. Let me see more information, see what he does after that loss. It's the first one in a long, long time. How does he grow from it?
Absolutely. I would be expecting Devin Clark not to really want to play around on the feet too much here against Jung. If he does manage to get the fight down and keep it down, I fancy him to win this fight. If he doesn't, for me, it's going to be Jung. Harry, going to move over to you for the next fight in the heavyweight division, and that's Marcin Tybura versus Blagoy Ivanov in a battle at the bottom end of the rankings, really. Two guys who are going to be fighting to stay in there. You're shaking your head. You're not really too excited about this one. Watching these two guys fight, though, in previous fights, you know, they do like to move forward. They're tricky enough in that they don't look like they're winning, but they always stay in fights, to be honest. And I'm very interested to see which one of them can stay in this one long enough to get their arms raised. What are you thinking heading into this one?
I think Marcin Tybura overall is a better fighter, right, than Blagoy Ivanov. It feels like, you know, the old tropes come out about Blagoy. Oh, he recovered from getting stabbed with a ever-growing machete as we go through. You know, now I think it's at 73 feet or whatever it was, right?
Rumor has it was the sword on Brock Lesnar's stomach that got him in there. So
nailed
it. Yeah.
You know, when a fighter is fighting, the thing that we're talking about is that your man got stabbed and came back from it. That's all I need to know, lads. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think he's a great fighter. He's a tough old cunt. I'll give him that. Marcin Tybura actually can do a bit of the kickboxing, can do a little bit of the grappling every now and again. And my problem with this, as you kind of say, is this is going to be, does Marcin wilt a little bit as this goes on, and can Blagoy come back and make it a semi-interesting encounter? My answer is probably not, right? Tybura should be able to just keep him at the end of a teep and the end of a jab, because, you know, Blagoy Ivanov probably couldn't fight his way out of a wet paper bag, and yet here we are, right? Like, I'm not excited by this fight. This is, as Shawnee Podcasts always says, this is a guy fighting ranked number 100 versus number 99, and they're going to swap over, and maybe one of them leaves the UFC. Like, whatever.
I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily label it as a loser leave town, Spencer, myself, but there is a couple of
It's
fights
just
on
'cause
this
they
card.
need bodies, not because they're good enough to be in the division.
Yeah,
See, and
these
I
guys
feel
seem
the
to be like,
opposite about Marcin Tybura. I think you threw out the Augusto Sakai as the Neo Magni. I said this week that Marcin Tybura feels like the heavyweight Neo Magni to me, a guy that's just outside of the top 10, loses to the guys that are better than him. Like, you look at their careers in terms of who they've faced and lost. It's kind of the heavyweight version of Neo Magni. If you're really good, you're going to beat Marcin Tybura. If you're not, he's just crafty enough and just knows what to do enough to beat you. And so, yeah, this isn't necessarily the fight I want to see. I liked the fight with Romanov last time. I would have liked to have seen him in there with one of the younger sort of ascending talents this time around, rather than Blagoy Ivanov, who we know who he is and what he is. But I still got time for Marcin Tybura.
indeed. We shall move on from that. I mean, I think if I'm watching this fucking fight, Tybura and Ivanov at about 4 or 5 a.m. in the morning, I'm probably not going to be happy about watching it. Let's be real. I might even turn off the telly and go to sleep and watch it the next morning. We'll see. We'll see how I'm feeling at the time. But one guy I'm definitely not going to want to miss out, and that's the Korean Superboy who's back in action. And he takes on Canada's. I was going to say Canada's Kyle Nelson in the featherweight division. Kyle Nelson obviously coming back down to featherweight after his lightweight tilt with Jai Herbert last time out. And first of all, Spencer, I'll maybe go to you. Why has the Korean Superboy been away for so long? Did he go like the Korean Zombie for some military service, or was he injured? Do we know?
I don't think we know 100%. He did his military service before, so it wasn't more mandatory military service. He's one of those guys that has just struggled with injuries, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like hasn't fought since the fight with Charles Jourdain, but it's been little injuries and have to withdraw and little injuries here and fight cancellation there, and just it adds up. I'm really curious to see what he looks like on Saturday, because things have been ugly the last 3 fights. They've been very impactful fights, lots of damage, finished in his last 2. Still only 31, still a guy that, you know, if these couple years off have given him a little bit of a reprieve from the punishment, given him a little bit of new pep in his step, then maybe he can turn things around and rekindle some of that interest. But not 100% sure why he's been out, but I'm happy to see him back.
Absolutely, I am too. And I mean, Harry, looking at Doo Ho Choi, I was actually in Toronto for UFC 206, and I got to witness the Cub Swanson fight live. And I mean, the place was electric. And, you know, he kind of went out and fought like that against Jeremy Stevenson, the same against Charles Jourdain as well. And it's kind of with his style, it's live by the sword, die by the sword, because in all 3 of those fights, there are times where he could have possibly won the fight, but ended up losing the fight. And he's definitely going to have to try and switch that up a little bit. He's going to have to lose, as you say, some of that mad bastardry, really, isn't he? And stop headhunting, because there is the cusp of a good fighter in there behind all the madness, isn't there?
Maybe. And the reason why I say maybe, and I don't even mean that in any way, you know, with conjecture, is we don't know who this lad is after 3 years out. You know, like MMA moves insanely quickly. We say it all of the time. When fighters take a year out, we're like, oh, Jesus, a year, no fighting. Jesus. But, you know, we say, okay, well, maybe it's an injury, or you can still stay in and you can still dip your toe in and do this stuff. One of the most interesting things when we were talking about Cyril Gagné and Johnny Bones Jones is Jones has been out for so long. What do we see? What do we see? And obviously, Doo Ho Choi's no John Jones, right? Let's not get that twisted. But like, what is Doo Ho Choi now? What has he been doing out in those 3 years? Has he been training? Has he been following MMA? Has he been utilizing the skill sets around him? And has he been doing it efficiently? And has he grown? Who knows? Like, we're going to see. And I'll tell you something for nothing. If he comes in back on this run at featherweight looking anything like he looked in those 3 fights prior to his break, and equally in that Cub Swanson fight, because let's be honest, Cub Swanson's no banger of a man. he's going to get eaten alive in this featherweight division of 2023. Absolutely eaten alive, because there are guys with no ranking that can hit like trucks and are happy to get into striking exchanges. And as much fun as we had watching that Cub Swanson fight, we saw the negative effects of that Cub Swanson fight. I don't even think we know how much that fight took out of Doo Ho Choi and how much of the negative damage that's happened to his brain in that fight as he took into Jeremy Stephens, the hardest hitting pound for pound fighter in the entire world, and then Charles Jourdain. Like, we don't know. Maybe that 3 years is something to do with fucking brain trauma. We just don't know.
Yeah.
To me, the reason why I'm excited about this fight is because I get to see essentially a brand new fighter, potentially.
Yeah, and that's what I'm looking at. And maybe to his benefit, you know, someone like Kyle Nelson, Spencer, is probably not going to come in here and stand in the pocket and bang. I would be very surprised if he did. And obviously you can get drawn into that style of fight. But for me, if you're Kyle Nelson here, you're closing the distance, you're putting Korean Superboy up against the cage, and you're trying to kind of, you know, moving down. Obviously he fought at lightweight the last time, has fought the majority of the time at the featherweight, but he is a big featherweight. And he'll be looking to try and impose his will on Doo Ho Choi, because, like, from what I've seen from Doo Ho Choi, moving forward in the pocket is super dangerous. Obviously not afraid to take a shot, to give a shot, and has got some good power that can hurt you as well. So if you're Nelson, why fuck around?
Yeah, I mean, he needs to close the distance from second one and stay there for as long as whoever is officiating this fight allows him to stay pinned up against the fence, not doing all that much, maybe grabbing a takedown, a little mat return here, a little roughy up there, because anything in space is just red flags all over the place. Kyle Nelson is 1-4 in the UFC. I'm surprised he's actually getting another opportunity here. This feels a little bit like here you go, Doo Ho Choi, supposed to be fighting in South Korea. We'll give you this fella, light him up, and then welcome back.
There's a big trend on this card.
Kyle Nelson's going to have to work real hard to not have that be the outcome.
Yeah, for sure. There is a big trend on this card of like these kind of maybe set up fights for the Korean talent here. Obviously, you're supposed to be in South Korea. You want your local talent to be doing good on the cards. A guy I was really impressed with watching back is Yusaku Kinosha. I think he's a fantastic fighter, exciting fighter. Adam Fugget. I can't say his name without laughing, but I think this is going to be a fun fight for as long as it lasts, because Kinoshita is going to come strong, and land unholy powerful punches. This guy doesn't know how to throw a soft punch, and we've seen that in his Dana White Contender Series fight, Spencer, getting the win in the third round. And I think this guy, 23 years of age, looks so calm and composed in there. I'm excited to see him fight. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, I mean, he was one of the guys on Contender Series last year that you looked at and thought, okay, I can see some upside here because of the age, right? Very poised in there against a long, kind of dangerous, awkward fighter in Jose Enrique, and just played with him the whole time. Enjoyed just making him miss, giving him little Nate Diaz finger points, having a couple laughs at him when he swung and missed. And then, as you said, laid him out with a beautiful left hand early in the third round. 23, good size, good power, really composed. Let's just see it. This is a solid step up. I like the fight with Adam Fugit, who looked good in his short notice debut last year, getting the call up from the regional ranks. He's fought good competition on the regional circuit. He's 12 years older than Kinoshita, so it's a good sort of face this veteran that isn't too deep into things, and let's see how you do. You're muted there, Io.
Ooh, rookie move. Anything to add on this? I'm doing this long enough now, not to get cut out with that. Anything to add on that fight at all, Harry? No, I thought so. Talk to me about Ji Young Kim and Mandy Bohm, if you don't mind. Spencer, I know we're going to jump to the road to the UFC fights last. I'm going to get your roundup on that. Ji Young Kim and Mandy Bohm, this to me is a loser leaves town kind of a fight. For Mandy Bohm, I think we haven't even seen a shadow of herself inside the UFC from what she's capable of, in my opinion. And this is a kind of an interesting stylistic matchup with Ji Young Kim, because, you know, Kim is a kind of a fighter who likes to fight on the outside. And this could be a kind of, let's say, a Mexican standoff if both women kind of fight to their usual style, where they're just both reluctant to fire off. I don't think we're going to see too much fireworks in this fight, but at least the spark of maybe the threat of losing your job within the UFC. Hopefully, we could see a little bit of a firefight here in the 125-pound division. What do you think?
Say it like it is. This fight is going to be a steaming pile of garbage, right? I think, if I'm honest, I think that there is a higher upside to Mandy Boehm. I think there is an opportunity. You're 2 fights down, fine. Loads of fight cancellations. That's a problem. Are we seeing something similar that we saw with Ariane Lipski, where she has all this hype outside of the promotion, comes in and takes a big old stumbling block for the first little while, manages to drag herself out where, look, she's not at the level of the violence queen that we saw. She's certainly not that. But is she able to turn herself around? You don't often make it back from 3 straight losses in the UFC. In the modern era, you don't make it back from 2 straight losses in the UFC. But neither of these fighters are fighters that really excite me vastly. I'd like to think that Mandy Boehm could get this done, but I think you're right with a Mexican standoff. I'm not excited by this in any way, shape, or form, to be honest.
Spencer, you're a guy who likes to ask questions. You like to, you've brought out your 10 things I like. What do you like about this? What should we like about this fight? Because I'm like Harry, you know, I tried to buttercoat it a little bit, and Harry brought it right down to my level of thinking.
So this one didn't land in the 10 things I like. I will preface it with that. I mean, look, it's 2 fighters that are combined have lost their last 6 fights in the UFC. So this is 100% win and you're in, lose and you go home. I am curious, as Harry said, to see if Mandy Boehm is just, you know, those initial stumbling blocks of getting in the UFC, and she's moved over to the States to do some training at Syndicate and things like that. Has it just been an acclimation period, and now we're going to see the best version of her? Ji Young Kim has had some close fights, some competitive fights, but just not been able to get the win. And I really would have liked for her to get that opportunity in South Korea at home. She had moved over to the States as well and hadn't been home for a long time. So that would have been a cool thing to see. And maybe that sort of spurs her on a little bit. I hope that they just come out here and go hell for leather. Like, just come out here and get slinging on each other, knowing that you've got to do something that really makes a point that you have something to prove and can be kind of a person in this division moving forward. Because for right now, it doesn't look like either quite belong. And given that they're both in their 30s, like, there's not a lot of time left to really get something started. So it needs to start on Saturday.
Absolutely does. Obviously, Mandy Boehm, but she's still with Extreme Couture. Is that right, Spencer?
I believe so.
Yeah, this will be our second camp there, I believe. So it'll be interesting to see, you know, obviously what I'd like to see from her in this fight, a little bit more clinch work and stuff. That's where she seems to do most of her good work. But
South Korea versus Germany, Syndicate MMA versus Extreme Couture, Battle of Las Vegas.
Love it. Like, we might not be excited about that fight, but I'm definitely excited about the next fighter I want to talk about, and that's Tatsuro Tiara, a guy that we have kind of, you know, I remember when he first joined the UFC, he was 10-0 coming in, and there was like one grainy video of him out there knocking the shit out of some guy, and I was like, fuck, this guy looks good. Well, now we've got to see a little bit of more of him inside the octagon, Harry. And it's definitely a fighter, and I know you don't like getting too excited too early about it, but you look at Tiara's 23 years of age, and he is showing signs that he can make it into the elite level in the UFC, or at least into the rankings, and remain there for years to come from what we've seen so far. And that's only been 2 fights inside the UFC.
Look, I wrote a spotlight about him in his last performance. I was really, really impressed. His ability to transition between positions is something that as I have said multiple times on this podcast, is something that I really like to see. It shows a level of flow. It shows a degree of level-headedness. It shows an ability to take what's in front of you rather than trying to force things. I really like that. What we know about Taira is that he's really fast and he's starting to settle. In the first fight, it looked like he just took a little bit too many chances. Looked like he wanted to impress just a little too much. Wanted to get it done just a little too much. And then against CJ Vieira, just looked great. You know, he just looked great. And you're right. I have learned from Sergeant Spencer underneath me that we ask questions. We don't get too excited and we wait and see what happens. But in an already stacked division, Tatsuto Taira is somebody that I was very excited about coming into this year, and I'm still very, very excited about. I do think that if everything keeps on the trajectory that he's on right now, he will make waves in this division. I think we're in for a ton of fun fights with him. He hits hard. He fights at the end of his reach, which is something that, as again, we talk about all the time, is a really, really difficult thing for longer fighters to get into. He moves his feet well, and he can grapple. So I'm in.
There you go. Ticks off a lot of boxes. I mean, unlike you, I get very excitable here, you know, from week to week. And I am excited about this guy, as we should. Before maybe you share your thoughts on him, his opponent, Jesus Aguilar, won on Dana White's Contender Series. And look, we're amongst friends here. We're being honest. You know, Harry shared his thoughts on Mandy Bone and Park. I'm not going to lie. When I watched his Dana White's Contender Series fight, I asked myself, what the fuck is this guy doing in the UFC? I mean, if you're going to reject someone like Brendan Loughnane a couple of years ago based off his performance and you're willing to accept this guy in, although, look, he put the kind of the grind on Ferreira, but I mean, he's been used as a kind of lamb to slaughter in this fight, Spencer. Am I being a bit harsh in saying that?
I mean, I think he's a lamb to the slaughter just because Tatsuro Taira is outstanding as a prospect. I think the thing, if and here I am always put in the position of sort of defending the Dana White Contender Series and Dana White, if there's any defense, he's a finisher and he beat a guy that got a win on the Contender Series the year before. But he's a specialist, and he's a specialist that is short and stout for the division. And so it's going to be really difficult. Like, if you're a guy that wins most of your fights by grabbing guillotines and choking dudes out, you kind of don't want to be 5'4" with little fire hydrant arms. And you're facing this dude that's 5'7", and as Harry said, fights at the end of his reach and knows how to use all of his length and all of his movement and reach and everything that he has. And so I think he's getting rolled out to the wolves in this one. But in terms of, like, can he be somebody that, you know, does the Cody Durden thing in the lower half of the division? Sure, maybe, but we're not going to see it on Saturday. Tatsuro Taira, as you and I will discuss on the picks and plays, is the biggest favorite on the card. He's minus 1,200, which is a ridiculous number that had you maybe briefly thinking about putting the entire bankroll on it to just make a couple of bucks and get back in the good. But, like, this is one where it's just going to be a steamroll, and we'll start making our assessments of Jesus Aguilar later.
100%. I'm looking forward to Tara getting in there and putting some work on Aguilar for sure. I think that's going to happen. Moving on, we have got the road to the UFC, which we'll talk about in just a minute. Obviously, we have another fight in the middleweight division, Dennis Tululin against Jung Young Park. You know, this card is really testing my pronunciations this week. It's good practice, but look at fight that's not really doesn't really bode too much interest in my eyes. I mean, and you know, Jung Young Park has been in some kind of quote unquote exciting fights. He does kind of fight on the front foot and is attack minded, which helps. But like, I mean, this doesn't spark my interest at all. It's just a fight that's going to be on that I have to watch before or after another couple of fights that I want to watch. Harry?
I don't mind this fight. I don't mind.
You always keep us guessing. You always keep us guessing, young Powell.
Look, I think that there is a place on every card, especially on its placement in the card. There is a place for this type of fight, right? Where both guys will go out, well, not necessarily both guys, but Jung Young Park will go out and he'll just throw hands and he'll put his face in front of punches. And It'll be fun enough. You know what I mean? Like, it's not, does it spark my interest? No. Is it going to make it to the severe spotlight? No. But am I going to have to watch it, and am I going to get a morsel of enjoyment? Probably, right? Like, probably. Any dude that is happy to go in there and block punches with his face is very silly, and I wish did not do that. But sure, I'm not going to stop him, you know? He signed the contract, and Dennis Mann, the Russian fella,
Tiulian.
yeah, that guy, like, look, he's going to throw some punches, and they will all land. And so, sure, we'll have 15 minutes of face punching. No problem.
Absolutely. And there's going to be plenty of face punching as well in the road to the UFC finals as well. We got a flyweight final, we got a bantamweight final, we got a featherweight final, and a lightweight final. And you know what? All you have to do is mention the mere word of final, and I'm in. Look, we got a final. We got something to fight for here. Spencer, why should we be excited? You were the guy who kept a close look at the road to the UFC. I personally did not. I will take an interest in these fighters and watch the fights on Saturday night. Maybe take us through from the flyweight all the way up to lightweight, what we should be looking out for and who we should be looking out for.
So the flyweights is the all South Korea battle. So it's Sunguk Choi against Hyung-Sun Park. Two very different roads. One comes in with 2 decisions, 2 hard-fought decisions at that, and then Hyung-Sun Park just beat the face off of 2 dudes. They come from very different camps. Park has been training, did a bunch of stuff at Bangtao. He is over with, there's a gentleman named Kevin Ju who works with Danny Rubenstein, is part of that kind of group of people. And it's just like, this is 2 different styles. This is a classic, to me, bit of a clash of styles. One guy that is looking for finishes and is aggressively after stuff in Park, and Choi, who's a little bit more comfortable just kind of using his time and playing, not necessarily playing things safe, but just not pushing the boundaries too much. He's going to do the right things most of the time, and it's going to come down to if Park can catch him. I think either one, maybe even both of them, can be wonderful additions to the division. We talk all the time about how much we love flyweight. Give me 2 more fun flyweight fighters. Let's go.
May I ask, out of interest,
Absolutely.
Spencer, what does
it's your show? You can ask whatever you like.
Yeah, too right. What does the winner get? The winner gets rewarded a UFC.
So the winner gets a contract. Yep.
Yeah.
The winner gets a contract. And then, I mean, as I said, I think we'll probably see, if not all 4 other finalists, get a shot at some point. At least 2 of them, I would imagine, because there's some good fighters here. There's some interesting talent here. And so this really is, it's essentially another audition, right? They've had a couple of chances already making it through to this point. Winner gets a contract. They are on the roster. I wouldn't be surprised if a couple fighters that, if we get some competitive fights, if we get some close decisions, a couple of those vanquished fighters get the old Stephan Bonner, God rest his soul, treatment of, we're bringing him with us too.
Absolutely. It'll be very interesting to see what works out in the road to the UFC. And we will be riding the road next week onto the next UFC pay-per-view card, which is a monster fight between Alex Volkanovski and Islam Makhachev in the lightweight division. I can't wait for that one, but we'll get through this card first on Saturday night. Derek Lewis versus Sergey Spivac. The road to the UFC. Almost bollocks that up at the end. The road to the UFC finals will take place, and Tatsuro Taira are definitely ones to watch on this card. We'll talk to you again next week. We'll be back in action for the UFC pay-per-view card. Looking forward to it. Enjoy the fights. Whether you're eating breakfast, whether you're having a late night snack, whether you're lying in bed, or maybe whether you're just waking up having some breakfast. It depends where you are in the world this weekend. We'll talk to you next week. Follow Harry Powell at BJJ_Harry Powell. Follow Spencer at Spencer Kite. Follow me at IO'Neil MMA. Check out all the lads' work, YouTube channel for Spencer's work, Severe Spotlight and Patreon, and the takeaways will happen this Tuesday. Check out the guys' show each and every Tuesday. Brilliant, brilliant breakdowns of each and every fight. I look forward to listening to Harry giving out about a lot of these fighters on that show next week. And of course, before you go, I'll ask you to sign up to the Severe MMA Patreon account of some fantastic content over there. Speakers Corner, Chasing Pack, Q&A with Shawnee, and a bunch of other stuff as well. Spencer cops in on the Speakers Corners every time and time again, and maybe we'll see him a little bit more on the Patreon. Maybe we'll have to create something to get him over there. Let's bring him in, and we can get something done. Take it easy, folks. We'll catch you the next time.